Y'all knows before we ask them out for life is out there. Hope you guys having a blessed day. Make sure you subscribe to that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. Now, you got Wes Huff, who completely and utterly destroyed Billy Carson. Billy been going around for the last few years trying to discredit the Bible, prove that Christ was not crucified. Basically give a take to the ancient civilizations like Mesopotamian, ancient Sumerian culture when it came down to the Enuma Elish, when it talks about the Anunnaki, but he completely gets dismantled by Wes Huff. Let's get right into the video. I think it's going to be around, let me put it right down, like 7 something. When they first get asked the question to prove if Christ, do you believe Christ was crucified, and get their take.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay. According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. And that Bible predates the King James Version of the Bible. And the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James Version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, is a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things in him. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love that he came to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our consciousness, and we can act on those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think that the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you.
Now, when you think about the entirety of the Bible itself, even from Genesis, when it talks about he'll put enmity between her seed and thy seed, which is the serpent seed, from the very beginning, it speaks about Christ coming into the flesh. Why you think it was imperative for the tribes of Israel throughout the entirety of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, to keep the bloodline pure, to not mate with heathen cultures or, pervert yourself with other nations and gods. And to be honest with you, a lot of people, since they don't have complete understanding of these things, they tend to go astray, forever learning, never able to come into the truth.
Respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show. I'm always like, challenge everything. Learn to critically think and continue to come to your conclusions. Even with Jesus, I'm not personally even waiting on that he has to come back to. I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and consciousness is already, I can tap into that right now. So you don't have to wait for him to come back. For those that believe he does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead on for what Billy was talking about. I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife, which yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming it's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I ask for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there. I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27,
Mm-hmm.
where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or,
That is wild, because Billy Carson's claim was that the Codex Sinaiticus does not have basically the same information that the current Bible, the King James, has. And Wes Huff is proving that the same books that are in the King James Bible is in the Codex Sinaiticus. And it kind of dismantles what Billy was talking about by trying to say that it mentioned that he was never, I guess, sacrificed and resurrected. And there is a little bit of I would say, a textual difference when it came down to the appearance of him when he resurrected. I believe it was in the book of Mark. But other than that, everything else is literally identical. So that kind of really tossed out whatever Billy was talking about.
John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever be able to see that
right now to make sure I have the right the version that I'm looking at?
While he's pulling that up too, like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and linguists, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like me.
Yeah, linguists.
What Sinai? I keep thinking of cyanide, like the poison. Sinai Bible. So
Right.
is that like a version? So from my own knowledge that I know, like when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible was how many different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day. How many different eyewitnesses and stuff there were, and they went on purpose to mention so many other names that they were able to cross-reference throughout history.
Billy over there struggling to find whatever website he initially got this translation. But it doesn't really make any sense, because if you're going to quote, just say, the codex, then you have to realize that it's actually no different. So you're just going to waste away trying to look for some type of clarity when there's nothing that you can find other than what's in the current Bible. So I think he was just on the ropes here. It really was terrible to me. I felt like he should have either, say, you know what, I'm just not in the best of spirits to do this debate. I mean, I would have faked the injury at this point in time.
And throughout those times, from my understanding, and those were different things that I always thought were kind of interesting that I felt was a good concept of proof. And then I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, was that where was that piece
I found
discovered?
the text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay.
The Gospel of Barnabas. Here we go again. So, I mean, it's fine if you misquoted something. It happens with anyone. It could have just been a late night, whatever the case may be. But the Gospel of Barnabas was not a good catalyst for what you were trying to prove. And Wes is going to basically destroy that as well.
Yeah, well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with. There are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery, and so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So, at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems.
Imagine trying to reference a document that is proven to be forged and is so many inaccurate things within it, because you can tell that the author in the Gospel of Barnabas was unfamiliar with the actual Aramaic or whatever the case may be at that time. So it just kind of puts you in a debacle, and it makes you just look like, what are you doing? It's almost like you're just biased. You're so biased that you're willing to believe anything in order to discredit the Bible.
With the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of 1st century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel,
literally in Spanish, that means it's not even as old as Latin or Hebrew. Like, it's terrible to even reference that.
of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian, and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So
He basically take them to the school. He's saying, look, when I research something, I make sure that I'm looking beyond the surface, just believing anything, and I'm doing my due diligence by proving these sources, making sure that they are actually accredited to something that is legit before I'm running with it. But when somebody is biased, like I said before, Billy just really dislikes the Bible because he probably doesn't even have the Holy Spirit at all to understand. I don't even know why I said probably even does. He doesn't have the Holy Spirit to even understand the Bible. So he's just trying to use any known bias or anything that speaks against the Bible and going around the world, having interviews about, like literally interviews about these same gospels and trying to say that they're true, knowing that, and I'm pretty sure he went a little bit above and beyond and knowing that these things are forgeries, but he's literally speaking on them as if they're factual and you can actually back it up with references and known historians and Bible scholars that literally give a test to it. That to me is nonsense. Why would you go around spreading lies, bearing false witness?
if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now, that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right
That
here. This is
nuts.
an almost.
That is crazy. That, see, when people understand, when everything is combined, it's different from when each individual writer are older than it actually being put together in chronological order. That's a big difference between finding separate manuscripts that predate the actual book itself being put together. So the Codex Sinaiticus is similar to what King James is. This is it's all the chapters of the Bible put into one book, but it's not the same as trying to say, oh, you found that codex, which is all put together, but the actual stories themselves, the writings themselves predate it actually being put into a book in simpler terms.
Most complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it
Is that the
has the
papyrus by
crucifixion.
any chance?
Yeah,
that
so
or did I
papyrus
just-
is just the what it's made out
What it's
of.
made out of.
So
material it's on.
I got that from
Yeah.
Chat GPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys. I'm just
I
trying
can
to
actually-
sound smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a
Well,
yeah, so I'll show you this. So I make the documents you actually.
And Billy tried to attempt to say that he kept walking off, and his screen kept cutting out as if he was connection. Nobody sees that. Nobody is witnessing whatever he is trying to push. That's why Billy had to take down that live he did, because it was literally full of lies. Literally, just admit that you didn't have, the information correct. You wasn't well studied, and you just got your ass handed to you. That's all it was.
Actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made.
Mhm.
So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Alland categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, and expert, I'm going to go with that. Let's talk.
You see how easy he said, if you say it's a known forgery, I'm going to go with that. What kind of answer, what type of response is that, bro?
Talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New
Well,
Testament.
hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like
They
trying to
wanna
write
say
notes
it's
like I
Mary
know what I'm
Magdalene,
doing.
but
But
no.
I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes
Oh.
what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So I just...
That is madness. You got literally every example that Bill Carson brought up was completely and utterly dismantled. And all he said was, if you say so, let's move on to this. We're not going to just braze over the fact that you said that Christ had a wife and you was preaching that all over the world, going on interview after interview saying that Jesus had a wife. But now that you've been corrected, you're trying just to push it under the rug. Like, what? That is madness to me, man. That is some crazy-ish.
Just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. That's I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit.
He said that's fair enough. I can respect that. Wow.
Predominantly from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation is a lot of the, in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously it's a smaller, Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the seven tablets of creation.
Word for
The
word.
Epic of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code upon Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text, meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I have found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Yeah, have you read the Enuma Elish?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enuma Elish for us?
Sure. The Enuma Elish is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal. And the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and text. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, basing on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that.
He's saying a whole bunch, and he said it's word for word. If you look at the creation story in the Bible versus the Enuma Elish, it's not the same. You're just talking right now about Murdoch, Nibiru, and that crash, and how the Tiamat, and how basically the body of Tiamat became the universe, the planet, the people. That's not the same as the Bible whatsoever.
Saturn and I believe Neptune switched places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enuma Elish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story. Slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the Epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text. if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle.
Only thing that even sounds close to me, other than them saying the waters and the flood, because a lot of ancient cultures have this flood situation going on. But aside from that, the Anunnaki to me just sound like similar to the sons of God. I saw the daughters of men that they were fair and they came down. And in the Bible, they choose wives, but in that situation, they experiment on humans. But in the same way that angels tamper with all flesh, and all flesh became corrupt upon the earth, the same way in uh Genesis 6 as a carry on into the flood. So that's what I see that's kind of similar, but it's definitely not word for word. And that's only like two situations that's not even close to being verbatim.
Battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu, and they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not, and they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here. They would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow, some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor. And
you remember when he mentioned on that live that he took down, nobody let him talk. He was unable to speak. Look how long of a rant went on right now. I mean, he's not being interrupted. Wes Huff is just being like patient as ever. And it's just quite odd. That's why he had to take it down. He actually discredited himself even more going that route, which is just straight up wow.
Worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient texts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe I believe in it. There's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a seriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. You know, the separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, you know, it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days. You don't.
I'm not going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There's certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Or let me add it to the scripture or this papyrus, because it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So was this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Yeah. So let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result, and you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, you know, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as it's just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for, you know, the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good. It's a mistake. And that
exactly, even the gods that were created from the, you know, like Tiamat and her husband, they displeased with the gods they created, but them very gods took them out. And then when they got taken out, they became the world, the galaxies, the stars, whatever the case may be, and the humans later on. But that's the result of defeat with no purpose, a downgrade.
That you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, I mean, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. It doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in my office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that, you know, that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see, if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text. In the
But what's the word for word?
in your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
Yep.
And so where do you get that from?
Well, throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are two aspects of the image of God. And so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit. And right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God is the same all the time, right? He's always good. It's always God is all the same all the time. Right?
Yeah, but we do see that in scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why when the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well within the covenant of marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God is has both aspects?
I mean, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe.
How many would tell you, that God's not a man? They've never been taught this.
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say, in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, orthodox.
That's wild to me. It's like everything that Bill Carson brought up was just completely dismantled. He didn't have an argument, really, and I just don't like the fact that he used like references that had no validity. There was nothing to it that can be proven to be authentic. And you were running around the world doing interview after interview trying to discredit the Bible, but then when it comes down to actually a historian, somebody who's a Bible scholar, comes in front of you and you're just like, okay, it is what it is kind of ordeal, but you're misleading so many people in the wrong direction into evil. But let me know what you guys think about in the comments, man. This is just wow. He got destroyed. He had to delete his life. And this just proves that God will always prevail. God will not be mocked, for he will laugh at a fool because he knows day is coming. And I'm up.